Coming up, exasperation over medical certificate reform is boiling over. General Aviation makes a top 10 list. The first major flying event of the season kicks off, and a water landing in paradise. AOPA Live this week begins in just a moment. Well, who thinks 90 days is equal to 7 months? The Department of Transportation, apparently. Hello, everyone, and welcome to AOPA Live this week. I'm Warren Morningstar. Tom Haynes is on assignment. Well, AOPA is exasperated with the Department of Transportation over medical certificate reform, and this week, AOPA President Mark Baker expressed his displeasure directly to Secretary of Transportation Anthony Foxx. Now, DOT has been sitting on the FAA's proposed rule for medical self-evaluation for nearly 7 months. Now, the mandatory review process is supposed to take no more than 90 days. I talked with Mark Baker earlier today via FaceTime. So this letter to the Secretary, is this our we're mad as hell and we're not going to take it anymore moment?
It's exactly what it is. You know, we have a responsibility to our members to keep pushing and be impatient when we think we have been patient enough. And frankly, I'm reasonably satisfied at this moment, cautiously optimistic, what the FAA put in front of the DOT is a reasonable answer to the third-class medical. But I'm very frustrated, extremely frustrated. It's been sitting for months and months and months over at the DOT without any action that I'm aware of before it gets moved to OMB. So we're not going to take this anymore. We deserve an answer.
Some of our members are going to say, a letter, big whoop, so what?
Well, you know, a letter is in the bureaucracy requires a response. And, you know, you can ask a phone call. We may even ask members to get excited and write letters later on. We will get a response. And I think the response is going to be, we need to move this forward. But it is frustrating, extremely frustrating. And I understand people's impatience with this because I consider myself impatient on this one as well.
That 3-page letter to the Secretary is blunt. Mark said it's incomprehensible that no action has been taken after 3 years of review. He said the evidence is clear that allowing pilots to fly without going through the third-class medical process is safe. The change in the rules would save pilots more than $24 million a year, and the FAA could save nearly $2 million. Well, now, AOPA, along with EAA, has been working on this version of medical certificate reform, as we said, for nearly 3 years. And we understand that for many of you, that's about 2.5 years too long. Well, our Vice President for Government Affairs, Melissa Rudiger, has been working these advocacy issues for a good number of years. And Melissa, why does it take so long, and has AOPA really done everything that it can to push things through as fast as it can go?
So the answer to your question, yes. AOPA and EAA are both doing everything that we can possibly do to push this reform across the finish line. And that said, the regulatory process is a rather cumbersome bureaucratic process, and it's actually intended, or it was put in place to protect us from the agency abusing its power by arbitrarily implementing rules that have not been properly reviewed. So it's a good thing in that sense. It requires that the FAA post the notice to the public, take comments, it goes through a whole regulatory review, economic review, it goes to the DOT, OMB. So all that said, it takes a lot of time. Many of you probably remember the light sport rule. That took many, many years to get through the regulatory process. I am confident, however, that just like with light sport, we are going to prevail at the end of the day, and I think we're going to see quicker action than we saw in light sport.
Well, and the fact that Congress is weighing in and will pass legislation if DOT doesn't act, I think probably is going to push things along.
Exactly. That's a good indicator that we're pushing in the right places to get this done.
All right. Okay. Well, sometimes being on the list isn't a good thing. The National Transportation Safety Board once again put general aviation in the most wanted list of transportation safety improvements.
Our most wanted list constitutes the steps that we want to see taken today as corridors to a safer future. That includes not only technology, but action by legislators, by operators, and by regulators working together. And it includes everyday people like you and me putting safety first.
Well, last year the issue was weather information for GA pilots. This year, loss of control.
It really is a big issue in the sense that about 40% of the accidents in general aviation, particularly personal flying, are loss of control accidents. So our focus this year is on making people aware of loss of control accidents, as well as supporting industry activities to reduce loss of control.
Now, the NTSB thinks more pilot education, increased currency requirements, and better situational awareness might reduce the number of loss of control accidents. So, is this a new issue for AOPA and the Air Safety Institute? Well, let's turn once again to Melissa. Okay, back to our advocacy efforts. Is this something we've been working on?
This is something we've been working on. And in fact, the NTSB report comes as general aviation is safer than ever. 2013 was the safest year on record for general aviation. AOPA has been working on preventing loss of control accidents for years. We co-chair a working group as part of a General Aviation Joint Steering Committee, and they're tasked with analyzing loss of control accidents. And David Ord from our Government Affairs Office says there is something that the FAA could do right now that would make a difference.
We feel strongly that by reducing regulatory burdens and barriers to getting safety-enhancing technology that exists today at a reasonable price point, like you can do for experimental aircraft, onto the existing fleet, safety will be enhanced.
And some progress has been made on that front. Although much of the focus has been on making it easier to put safety-enhancing technology into new aircraft, AOPA continues to push the FAA to reform rules for technology upgrades to existing aircraft. Loss of control has been on the Air Safety Institute's radar for some time, and it's developed a whole range of resources to help pilots fly more safely.
We have everything from the base turn to final, which is sort of your classic low altitude stall spin scenario, to thunderstorm avoidance, to decision making, which could mitigate the risks associated with a loss of control type of accident. So the best place to go if you're interested in learning more and put another tool in your toolbox would be the Air Safety Institute's educational training resources.
And those resources are working. General aviation continues to get safer. The fatal accident rate has dropped 40% in the last 10 years.
All right, thank you, Melissa. Now here's an example of something where too much regulation could hurt safety. The FAA proposed rule for early retirement of ECI replacement cylinders on the big Continental engines. When the proposal first came out, AOPA argued that the repetitive inspections and early removal would be extraordinarily expensive and likely cause more problems than they solved. FAA did reconsider and modified the rule. It's now proposing a longer compliance interval, but AOPA still thinks the rule should be closer to what the NTSB originally recommended. You can read more on our website. While much of the country is cold this week, many pilots are getting the year's first aviation event started in Sebring, Florida. AOPA Live's Paul Harrop joins us from the U.S. Sport Aviation Expo. And Paul, what's going on down there in Florida?
Warren, the ramp is full of display aircraft and pilots from places north and all around seeking Florida's warmer weather. This is the place to be for the fun side of aviation. There's no hot and high IFR machines here. These are the just for fun, let's go flying kind of aircraft. If you've never been to the display ramp at Sebring, you're really missing out. From amphibs to tail draggers and even some other forms of flight, it's all here. Now, notice I didn't call it a static display. Aircraft companies are giving demo rides and showing off their new products. It's very dynamic, and AOPA is here. We're showing off the 152 Reimagined and gathering signatures in support of medical certificate reform. Now, those yellow airplanes kind of contrast a bit of a gray sky with some gusty low ceilings that may be keeping some LSA flyers out today. But hey, I just checked the forecast. Tomorrow looks a lot better, so we expect to see this ramp fill up. That's it from Sebring. We'll send it back to you, Warren.
Thanks, Paul. And we'll have more from Sebring next week. Also look for stories on AOPA.org. Well, coming up after the break, calling the cops on drones and splashdown in paradise. AOPA Live continues in just a moment. Welcome back. You're watching AOPA Live this week. Well, the FAA is asking for help in policing the use of small drones from the police. The agency has released guidance to the law enforcement community explaining the rules that small unmanned aerial system operators should follow, and asking the cops to investigate and report unsafe operations. Meanwhile, the feds have given CNN permission to fly drones for news stories. The special permit will give FAA the chance to gather data on how to safely integrate drone use into news gathering. Now remember, the agency prohibits using drones for any commercial purpose without getting special permission. So MSNBC and Fox, you need to go get your permits. And while we don't know yet who will be facing off in the Super Bowl, it's not too early to make plans to fly in if you have your tickets. The FAA has released the Super Bowl flight advisory to provide an advanced look at what the NOTAM will likely include, so that pilots can make plans. There will be special operations and procedures to deal with the extra traffic. You'll find more information on our website. And finally, last week we showed you how to fly to the Bahamas and what to expect once you're there. This week, we get wet, or at least some of us do. AOPA pilot editor-at-large Dave Hirschman takes you along on a Bahamian seaplane adventure.
The sparkling blue of the Bahamas is intriguing at any height, but when seen up close from a seaplane, it dazzles. Rocky green reefs are visible beneath the clear ocean surface. Miles of white sand beaches pass by a few wingspans away. Tiny, never-visited atolls barely clear the ocean surface. And some of the world's best saltwater fishing and scuba diving attract sportsmen from around the world. Flying here is a sensory overload. The best part is that these exotic adventures are well within reach for U.S. pilots. Even a relatively slow-flying Cub, for example, can make the trip from South Florida to the Bahamas' more distant out islands in a single day. Most seaplane owners are reluctant to operate their airplanes in saltwater, but in the Bahamas, the chance to explore remote beaches and keys is just too good to pass up. And such journeys are all the more memorable when shared with friends. These Cubs have been prepared for saltwater with extra corrosion protection, and they'll be thoroughly cleaned when they return to the mainland. Seaplane flying in the Bahamas was severely restricted in the 1970s and 80s to combat drug smuggling, which was rampant in the region back then. Some of those outdated laws are still on the books, and AOPA is working with the Bahamian government to open up more opportunities for recreational seaplane flying. These aviation-friendly islands are well known to U.S. pilots, and expanding seaplane flying here adds a whole new dimension to the excitement. Dave Hirschman, AOPA Live.
Thanks, Dave. Somehow you managed to get all the tough assignments. This story, by the way, is part of a series on flying in the islands. You can find much more inside the February edition of AOPA Pilot Magazine. Well, that's it for this week. Tom will be back next Thursday for another edition of AOPA Live This Week. We hope to see you then.